Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.
You're listening to the Minimalists Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Today we are joined by our returning champion. Jack Conti is here. Jack is the founder of Patreon and is one half of the talented musical duo Pomplamoose. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about wanting to find a minimalist solution to start, promote, and expand her creative business. And then we've got a lightning round question about the most fun and authentic ways to make income. That's followed by our Right Here, Right Now segment and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 444. That's the full episode where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. Our phone number is 406-219-7839 or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Meg in Fresno.
Hi there. My name is Meg, and I'm a Patreon subscriber. So my question for you is, what are some minimalist-approved ways to promote your creative work or your product, which in my case is a children's book, which I have on Instagram, it's on Amazon, all that stuff. But I'm wondering, what are some ways that are minimalist-approved to promote your book that aren't just advertisements, because as we know, advertisements suck. Thank you guys so much and look forward to hearing from you.
Jack Conti, I thought this was the perfect question. We've got a bunch of audience questions for you today, but this one was the perfect one to start with because this is sort of the creator's dilemma. I've made something, I'm really happy with it. Now, how do I get it in front of people? How do I get them to read it, to listen to it, to watch it? How do I connect with people? And now we're told, well, you just use social media. It's up on Instagram, but it's so noisy on social media. As you know, the Minimalists recently stepped back from social media for all of 2024. And what we decided is we had our most successful year ever on social media last year. We reached 500 million people. But of course, it's never enough. And you always want more, more, more. And it was time to simplify, and we realized we were contributing to some of the noise, and the noise was actually getting in the way of what we were creating. And so we said, what if we step back a bit? Is there still a way to connect with an audience? We've really leaned into the Patreon side of things. We've leaned into our podcast and to our newsletter over at theminimalists.com, but we've put the social media on pause. The studio used to be filled with 10 different people, and we have people filming and transcribing and picking out the TikToks and all of these other things. And I'm not unhappy with that. But as soon as it became an obligation, I felt like it was sort of getting in the way of the art. And that's why I reached out to you, because just recently at South by Southwest, you had an amazing talk. It's called The Death of the Follower. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes so people can check out the whole thing. But I was hoping you could start by maybe summarizing that as a jump-off point for this conversation.
Yeah, what I've seen over the last 3 years is essentially the internet and the way it's been organized for the last 20 has completely shifted. Web 1, when it came out, was really just like a read-only version of the internet in the 90s, like AOL. You could log in and read the news. And then Web 2 came around, which was the ability to post online as a creative person, which is amazing, right? Like that's a beautiful thing. We're doing it right now, right? We're sharing this podcast online with others. That's an invention of Web 2, from the early 2000s. And the beautiful thing about the emergence of Web 2 was this idea of the follower, right? You could not only post, but people could click a subscribe button, a follow button, and they could sign up to see more of your stuff in the future as a creative person. That was a beautiful invention. I don't think that's a small thing. I think that's a piece of internet architecture that changed the world for the better. And what was an incredible format for the distribution of communication and creativity on the internet. Okay, wonderful. Then we all went home and it was puppies and rainbows and sunshine for the rest of humanity, except it wasn't, because in the 2010s and then, right around the turn of the decade in 2020, TikTok emerged. And what we saw was the whole internet shifted away from the follower subscription feed and into the For You feed. Everybody thought that TikTok was, was being innovative around short form vertical video. That wasn't it. It has nothing to do with short form vertical video. It was For You. For You is when I log in and I see the app, I get a list of algorithmically curated posts that TikTok thinks I will watch, not the creators that I have subscribed to. So essentially what's happened as Instagram copied them, as YouTube copied them, as the rest of the internet copied For You, we've moved away from the follower, this concept of I follow and subscribe to a bunch of creators that I like, and we've moved into a phase where the platforms curate my information diet for me, regardless of what I've chosen to follow, regardless of who I've chosen to form a relationship with. And essentially what's happened is the death of the follower, the end of this era where the architecture of distribution for creativity on the internet was centered around individuals following others. And that entire graph has shifted around curation and interest-based.
And what happens here is now those follower counts, they essentially become vanity metrics. And you talked about in that death of the follower talk, you talked about the algorithm and how corrupting it has become, because no longer are we creating the things that we're interested in. We're creating things that will perform well for the algorithm. Can you expand on that?
So there's a really dangerous thing that happens to creators, happens to us when we're posting, and we know that we will get more reach. We will reach more people if only the thing that we have to say is like X, Y, and Z. Hey, actually, if you put a good cold open at the beginning, if you make people feel a little bit extra fear when they're reading their thing, if you sensationalize it a little bit, we'll give you more reach. If you ask people to leave a comment or whatever, you'll get more, in the EdgeRank algorithm to sort of surface your video to the top. The point is, there's all these tricks and tips and things that we're learning consciously and unconsciously about how to get more reach. And it's changing the art itself. It's changing what we have to say. It's changing how we say what we want to say. And it's not only changing those things in a way that's subtle, it's changing our minds. We now think we want to say something other than what we actually want to say. It's changed our own belief in what art is and what we feel important to express. And that's what we're seeing now at scale on the internet, is we're saying all these things, and then we look up 5 years later and creators are burning out and wondering why they feel out of gas. And it's because we're not even saying the shit we actually want to say anymore. We're saying what the algorithms want us to say. And it's having an impact on our hearts. It's having an impact on our own ability to persist and to keep creating and to keep being joyful.
PK, I think we're at the precipice of this mass exodus, and I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but I just can't help it sometimes.
Some people just have it. The hip hop is in their blood. They can take you out of Ohio, man, but they can't take Ohio out of you.
So I do think we're at the precipice here because of what Jack's talking about. There are a lot of people you're seeing with the burnout, but beneath that, there are a lot of people who are experiencing the low-level anxiety, the discontent, the feeling like I'm obligated to create in order to feed this thing. And sometimes that's because we want to optimize more followers and more follower count. But someone like Meg is like, I'm interested in getting my work, my children's book in front of more people. Well, why? Well, there are a few reasons. One is I want to add value to people's lives, but also it'd be nice to make an income from my creative work. And I think that's where Patreon has come into play for a lot of people. However, quite often people just start a Patreon and they think, well, people will now flock to me, and that becomes a problem as well. The thing that I've learned is that good businesses make money, but great businesses make a difference, or great businesses add value in some way. When Nicodemus and I started The Minimalists, it was just a blog, theminimalists.com, and 52 people showed up the first month and read our stuff. And to me, that was amazing, because before that, it was just a bunch of agents and publishers sending me no letters. And so everyone was rejecting my writing. I wrote fiction all throughout my 20s. And so all of a sudden, 52 people were saying yes, and they started sharing it. And that became 500 people, 5,000 people, 5 million people at the blog's peak. A lot of people were reading our work because we were adding value. And then eventually we added enough value to enough people's lives, pre-algorithm. Enough people were sharing it that they were willing to support the work. In fact, they started asking us, can you start doing live events? Can you write a book? We made a film and ended up on Netflix after Netflix told us no twice. And so it was about creating things that added value to people's lives. However, where we are now is there's so much noise. It's easier than ever to create. It's easier than ever to reach people. But simultaneously, it's become more difficult because it's so noisy. And if you have something to communicate, you're competing against all of the other noise that you're experiencing.
That's exactly right. And what it's done is it's created an element of mistrust between the creator and the audience. The reason that you and Ryan were able to achieve so much is because by communicating directly with your audience, you could listen to their feedback and trust their feedback and then deliver more of what they needed in accordance with what made you feel alive. But once you place that wall between the audience and the creator, and you substitute the algorithm for the audience, now you're performing for the algorithm, and you don't really care about the audience because you know that if you just get the formula right, the algorithm will protect you. And the audience learns to mistrust you, which is why we get so angry at clickbait. We get so upset when we read the title that you use to gamify my attention. And then I watch 20 seconds of the video, or sometimes you deceive me and I don't realize until I'm 4 minutes in that you wasted my time. You played me because you were performing for the algorithm, not for me. It's kind of like when you watch a boxing match. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people have a problem with Floyd Mayweather, because he doesn't box for the fans. He boxes for the judges. And so when you watch him, it looks really boring unless you know boxing really well. You feel like he's losing the whole time. And then at the end, you realize, wait a minute, this guy won? He should have lost. He wasn't thinking about you. He was thinking about the judges. Now, in Floyd Mayweather's case, that's smart boxing. But when it comes to content creation, if you're performing for the algorithm and you're ignoring your fans, it's the opposite. You're not winning like Floyd, you're losing. And your customers are too.
Jack, you told this anecdote about David Bowie. Can you talk about that really quick? Because I think it aligns perfectly with what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we're all so convinced at this point. We don't even question that we want views and followers and watch time. And right, we've seen these dashboards. I've looked at those dashboards. Pomplamoose, my band, has been looking at those dashboards for the last 17 years. We've been uploading to the web. And we know what we want. We know how to get more followers and, all these things. You think David Bowie, like, if you went back in time and you said to David Bowie, hey, David Bowie, like, what do you want in your life? Like, what matters to you? What are your goals? Like, imagine if David Bowie had been like, I want to maximize the amount of human hours spent consuming my work.
You'd be so disappointed.
I'd be that sounds horrible. And yet it's what we're all fucking doing. Sorry, can I swear?
Whatever you want.
Like, that's how we're all organizing our brains and our time to achieve that outcome. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like anti-outcome or anti-goal. I have goals. Like, I think goals are really important. They help us focus and organize our minds and direct our minds to, 1 inch at a time over a long period of time, which is like how you create change in yourself and in the world. And so I love the idea of goals. But what goal you choose for yourself is very important. What you spend your time chipping away at every day is very important. And if you chip away at watch time, boy, you can see, the limit of that. As you approach the limit of that is kind of where we're ending up now as a society and as creative people. We've been chipping away at watch time. And then you wonder why the internet looks the way it does. And that's why. So yeah, I mean, and by the way, I hope this, I just have to say, I have so much empathy for this caller because that this is the hard part. Here I am talking shit about social media, and yet my band publishes 2 vertical clips a week on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube Shorts. And the reason we do that is the same reason. We're looking to reach people. And the point that you made is true. Patreon does not provide that service to creators. We are not a distribution platform. We are for media and community and business. That's what we do. We don't provide reach to creators. So in the day and age where you're looking to have impact on others, looking to get reach, somehow Pamplemousse has had to figure out how do we do that and stay true to our values, not feed the beast, stay authentic about what matters to us, not feel like we're contributing to the negativity of the ecosystem, but contributing to making it better. That's been the challenge. And it's required some very specific tweaks that we've made on our end. But we've been very intentional about those tweaks. And I'm really glad we have, because I'm not going to say it's solved the problem, but it's made us feel better about participating in this machine.
Well, let's get concrete for Meg from Fresno for a second. She has this problem, or at least a perceived problem. I've written a children's book, and now I can't connect with enough people. Well, first thing we have to do is identify what is enough. Because if we don't look at what enough is, we'll keep looking for more. And then we start doing a bunch of things that compromise the creativity, compromise what we want to be doing so we can get more without ever stopping to ask, why do I want more? And you have to ask yourself, what is enough? If you want peace, especially, because if you don't ask that, you'll never find that level of peace.
What do you want?
Yes.
Start with what matters to you. What are you trying to achieve? And it's funny. This might sound like a simple question. It's not. It takes some introspection to understand, what do I want? What do you want with a children's book? Zoom forward 2 years. Your dreams have come true. Now write 3 pages about what that looks like. 2 years from now, your dreams about this children's book, write it out. Spell out that dream. What does life feel like? What do you feel like? How do you wake up in the morning? What are you feeling when you wake up in the morning? How do you spend your days? I'm talking about not incremental success. Dream big. Your dreams have come true. What are your days like? How do your hours get spent? What do you think about? What is happening with your book? What is happening with your life? Honestly, Pamplemousse does this exercise. We ask these questions to ourselves every year. And they change. They change over time. So it's so important to keep up with your changing life and changing physiology and changing body and changing mind. I think it's a really important series of questions to ask and answer on an annual basis.
And that question is not only a productivity tool, it's also a psychological bulwark. When you think about what you want and you define it with precision, you're not just making it more likely that you'll achieve your goals, but you're also protecting yourself against a very predictable form of self-condemnation. Jason Fried says, ambiguity breeds anxiety. If you don't think about what you want, you're very likely to be the kind of person who's absolutely crushing it in a very meaningful sense. But the whole time you're thinking of yourself as a loser, you're feeling really discouraged, and you're ready to give up on your dream. Why? Because you never measured things and defined things well enough to know that you're actually crushing it.
Hey, Meg, I'm sorry we missed you in Fresno. We had to cancel that tour stop. We've been doing this great tour for our 10th anniversary of our book, Everything That Remains. And we had 7 different cities, but in Fresno, I had a really bad fever, so we couldn't make it. We'll make it up to you in the future, but if you'd like, you can see us in San Diego or San Francisco later this year. There are still some free tickets available at theminimalists.com/tour. This is our first free tour in 9 years, and it's been great. This is one of the things that we optimize for, this community connection. You can get some of that through Patreon way better than you can social media, for sure. But then when you actually meet with people in person, Sam's been to one of our live events before, and what we're doing is we're connecting with people face to face. And there's a select number of seats, so only so many people can be there, and we're able to connect with them in ways you can't do just by broadcasting 7 vertical videos a week on TikTok. And by the way, TK, you were talking about that question, asking what do I want from this? you might be surprised by the answers too, right? Because for me, my answer was like, I want way fewer things on my calendar. I would have, if I didn't stop and ask that question, I would have never suspected that, because to me, busy was a beacon of look how successful I am. Look how important I am. Feed my ego because I'm busy. When you meet someone, say, what have you been up to lately? Oh, I've just been so busy lately. When I say I'm busy, what I'm really saying is my life is out of control. Everyone else's emergency has become my urgency because they've put it onto my calendar or into my inbox. And so for me, the outcome is often doing less, having fewer obligations. So the things I do commit myself to, I find them to be meaningful and important to me. And as a byproduct, a lot of people find meaning in the things that we create as a result. Alabama, we got a bunch more callers, but first, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer the Patreon community chat's question of the week.
Now, we used to answer social media questions, but we're not on social media right now. And so you launched this beautiful new feature on Patreon called Patreon Community Chats. And this is, to me, the essence of what social media was when I first started interacting with people on social media. And so every week we go out to our audience. Instead of just answering their question, we ask them a question and we get some feedback from them. And during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims. We catalog all of those minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast. And by the way, you can find all of our minimal maxims now over at minimalmaxims.com. If you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.email. We'll send you the show notes. We'll never send you junk or spam or advertisements, but we'll start off your week with a bit of simplicity and a handful of pithy aphorisms to simplify your week. Alabama, what is the question of the week this week?
This week, it is, if you could earn a living doing anything in the world, what would it be?
Another interesting question. TK, what was your pithy response to this?
I dream of a world where there is no distinction between pay and play. And so I'm going to quote Jack here. He said something beautiful, paraphrase quote, where he says, know what you want. Don't let other people tell you what you want, because if you let other people tell you what you want, then you'll go out there and you'll get what they want for you rather than what you want for yourself. And so I see the essence of play as finding something that is worth doing for reasons other than external demands, external expectations. And it's something that just makes you come alive to do it. And for me, the ideal world is one in which everyone is so in tune with the rhythm of their true selves that they show up, they do something that's really fun and fulfilling to them, and they create value for others in the process, and they attract those people into their lives who say, hey man, I really love the way you're delivering that. I really love the way you're creating that, the way you're bringing that together. Can I give you some value for that?
Jack, I've found that the joy of creating is often extinguished when it becomes an obligation. It's extinguished by the demands of income. I must turn this into a business. I must get X number of followers. I must earn revenue. I must hire a team. I must. And all of a sudden, we are getting in the way of the thing that actually lit us up. Have you experienced that in your own creative life?
100%. It's a constant struggle. It's not something I've solved. It's something I think about all the time. I think that tension, at least for me, I've found that the root cause of that tension is the gap between two things that I deeply want. I want to fully be myself. I want to be who I am in its purest form. That is joyful play. That is self-expression, to be me and to be accepted for who I am, which is a challenge not just for creative people, but I think for everybody. That's number one. And I want that. And I want another thing, which is to have a positive impact on my other fellow humans on this planet during my short time that I get to be on Earth. I want both of those things very deeply. They both really matter to me as an artist. And those two things are often in conflict. And so the joy getting sucked away from creativity often happens when I move too far in one direction or the other. When I don't acknowledge that these are two things that I want, and I want both, and they are in conflict. And I'll just give you like a straight example of that. Pure joyful self-expression. If I do that, sometimes I'd probably just like fill the internet with like unproductive anger, rage monster, like stuff that isn't like useful. Yeah. But it would be a moment of pure, authentic self-expression. But then it would look like, the Twitter feed of some people that where it's just like unfiltered anger, which is not having the positive impact on humanity that I want it to have. And so there's this tension that I think I, as an artist, when I am honest about the things that I want, I struggle with finding. And so I found that the best way I can do this is think about that tension, be honest about the long-term impact that I want to have on other people, and try to figure out how to fully self-express myself, so that I am being honest about who I am as a human being.
I think that there is always going to be some sort of tension there. With my writing students, I teach a writing class. I talk to them about the difference between communicating and expressing yourself, right? If you're just expressing yourself, you can yell and scream, and it's super expressive, but you're not communicating something that's meaningful to an audience. If you're 100% communicative, you're like a calculus textbook, and no one is sitting down to listen to the audiobook version of the calculus textbook, right? Because you don't find it very expressive or compelling. But the best art often merges the two, the expression and the communication, in ways that light up the artist and the people who are finding value in whatever they're creating, whether it's music or films or podcasts or paintings. It has to be something that lights you up, that gets you out of bed, because otherwise, you're now creating for the algorithm. And that's really where the burnout comes.
Exactly. If you're fully outcome-oriented, fully goal-oriented, and you're just thinking about how do I maximize reach, then it can be draining on your creative soul, because you end up saying things that aren't really what you want or what lights you up. It's not play at that point. It's work. It's teleological. It's closing the gap between a current state and an end state. And that can be less fun unless it happens to line up with exactly who you are as a human.
We had so many people on Patreon answer this question. I mean, hundreds of people. If you could earn a living doing anything in the world, what would it be? Mary and a bunch of others said travel. This one comes up a lot. But the truth is, there are a lot of people who earn a living from traveling. Our friend Colin Wright, he's going to be on the podcast with us in a few days, and he'll be at our San Diego tour stop. He made a living traveling for like a decade, and he actually just went to a new country every 4 months, and everywhere he went, his readers voted where he was going, and he made a living writing books off of that. Now, he didn't become a multimillionaire off of it, but that was not his outcome. And I think that's important to understand. If your outcome is, I want to become a multi-millionaire writing children's books, well, you might have to get really good at the algorithm then, right? Or you have to get really good at the business of publishing. If it's, I want to make enough money to sustain myself, and you know what I've done? I've pared down my bills so much that I don't have to earn that much money, but I can still do the thing that I feel compelled to create. Oh, what a beautiful life that is.
By the way, really quickly, it's a great illustration what Colin did of what Jack just said about living in that tension and finding yourself in the whole picture. It starts with your own self-interest, but it ends in how you make a difference for others. In order for Colin to be able to have that kind of life, he had to give up the freedom to choose where he goes next, and he had to share that choice with other people. So he had to give in order to get, and there's that balance.
Sebastian, Sarah, and Amber all said that they wanted to do something with wildlife preservation. But guess what? There are a lot of people who earn an income from wildlife preservation. Tracy and Ann said home health and caregiving. Again, plenty of people make a living from that, right? Catherine, Ann, Kat, and Sarah said animal rescue. Mitchell, Sita, they said, that was more wildlife preservation here. Amber said museum curator. Well, guess what? every museum, well, at least most museums, employ a curator, right? But there are also other ways to deploy those curation skills outside of museums. That was the one thing I learned when we started The Minimalist. I just wanted to write fiction my whole life. And then I was like, oh, there are other ways for me to express myself and communicate. And so I became more vehicle agnostic. I still found vehicles that resonated with me, things I enjoy, but I really enjoy podcasts. So especially audio podcasts. So let's focus on doing an audio podcast. I enjoy some documentaries. Well, let's make a documentary, see what happens, right? I didn't have a specific outcome in place because I think I would have ended up disappointing myself over and over and over. But then also I wouldn't have gone as far in some areas because the expectation would have been way too low. Like our first film on Netflix reached almost 100 million people. That was never the goal for that. The goal was, let me make a film that we feel like will add value to some people's lives. And if it does, guess what happens? Quite often, the people start sharing it with the people that they love because they want to add value to their lives as well. Just a few others here. Adam said, I'd love to get paid to be a parent. Yaman said, I want to be a musician with a 50-50 split between being a bedroom artist and a touring act. Well, guess what? A lot of people make money touring. I mean, I have a lot of musician friends, many of whom have been on this podcast, and they make some money from their music, but a lot of music is touring.
I just have to chime in there because it's such a great example of what is it that you want, right? And being clear about that. So Pomplamoose decided a long time ago, we don't want to be a touring band. Natalie and I, my partner in Pomplamoose and my wife in life, we're both homebodies. We don't like being on the road 50 days a year, 100 days a year, playing the same songs over and over again. We love being in our recording studio, making music together and writing songs together. And so very early on, we decided, you know what? Pomplamoose is only going to do tours when we want to get filled up, when it's we want to have that fun of playing a show. And the goal of playing the show is to have fun and get filled up. That's the goal of playing the show, which is different than we're going to build a touring business, right? You do different things when the goal is we want to fill up our emotional containers here.
Yes.
And then we spend our lives, making music in the studio. And that's how Pomplamoose operated for many, many years. So, the people will tell you there's all sorts of that's not real music people. I call them that's not real music people, which is hey, here's how the system works. And if you don't do it as the system says you should, then you're not a real fill in the blank. But the truth is you can set up whatever you want for yourself, for whatever is right for your goals and what you want as a person. Pomplamoose said, we're not going to be touring artists, and we're not. And, Pomplamoose is a profitable business. It's my wife's full-time job. It's her whole salary. We pay, multiple people full-time to be employees for Pomplamoose, and they have health benefits, and it works. So, so the point is yeah, you can, if that's what he wants to be 50-50, great, you can make that happen for yourself. It is possible.
You absolutely can. And there will be a period of time where you're trying to figure out the right ratio. And by the way, the ratios tend to change over time too. I assume there was a time where you were doing more touring than what you're doing right now. You're also running a very large company, and so that would make touring even more difficult. But even for the Minimalists, we've done 11 tours over the last 12 years, the largest of which was 100 cities, 119 events. And it was really taxing. And I would not do that same tour again, but it really filled me up. But trying to replicate that, then it just becomes an obligation. This most recent tour we've done, the Everything Tour, 7 cities, but all in California. So generally, I could probably be back in my bed by the end of the night that night, because I really enjoy the live events. I think there's a deep connection there, but I don't like the travel. I don't want to get on planes and rent cars and stay in hotels. And in fact, we started a local community called Sunday Symposium. Sam, I know you've been to one of the Sunday Symposiums here, where it's just 200 people, and we limit it to 200 people in these live events. So people from all over the world come to those, mostly people in LA County, but maybe half the people are from either Germany or Iowa or Canada or Mexico. They're coming from all of these different places because there's something about that live connection that fills us up. It's not really a business endeavor for us. As long as it breaks even, I feel really great about it.
Exactly. And I remember the moment when we really fully realized that as a band. We had been grinding on Pomplamoose for probably 6 years, and and we looked at our dashboards and everything was up and to the right. And, it was all, more views and more this and more that. And Natalie, my partner at Pompoose, was just feeling empty. She was just done. She was like, I can't take this anymore. I want out.
Wow.
And then she went on a small tour, actually not for Pompoose, just for her solo career. She did like a small tour for herself. And she played one room with a few hundred people there. And afterwards, she remembered why she was doing it. And it was literally, it took one show. And I remember the show. She was sitting up there. You could hear a pin drop in this audience. People were so focused. She was up there singing like an angel and playing the most beautiful songs. And you could tell people in the audience were really moved and were really appreciating what she had to say as an artist. And she got to see it in their faces. She got to see their shining eyes as they were like looking back at her. And that is so much more powerful than opening up a metrics dashboard and looking at, numbers and graphs to see your impact on your fellow human. After 6 years of opening up that iPhone app, it's no comparison.
Rhino and I were just talking recently, and he said that it's what's tricky about the numbers is that once you hit one milestone, your brain just normalizes it right away, and you immediately have a new milestone that you feel like you need to have. And so those numbers can't fill you up. And I love how you said we go out on the road because it fills us up, and that's hard to fail at. And I think there's a lesson there. Do the things that are so close to you that it's incredibly difficult for you to fail, because even if you do fail, you'll walk away from it saying, I had no choice anyway. I had a theater professor who said, in response to a question, how do I know if a life of being an actor is for me? He said, if you have a choice, exercise it. This career is only for people that don't have a choice. And how could he say that? It's because there are some people who say, acting fills me up, man. And that's what gives me the power to endure all the crap and failure that comes along the way.
This phenomenon that you're talking about of getting used to whatever success you've just achieved, right? This is often referred to as the hedonic treadmill. I think there's some actual psychological terminology for it as well, but I think, in the vernacular, it's the hedonic treadmill. And what's interesting about it is that is a evolutionarily beneficial trait for humanity, right? Because it works in the opposite direction too. If you lose something, you get used to that loss eventually, and you revert back to your baseline as a human. And this is a wonderful phenomenon that happens in our lives. It works for us, right? In fact, there are studies. I forgot which ones. I wish I could quote them, but there are studies that sort of track people through tragic loss in their lives. People who have, even like in some cases, people who have like lost a limb, or like people who have, had a person that they've lost, or lost a job, or, a death, and 12 months later, 18 months later, 24 months later, in the data, it shows sort of people reverting back to this baseline of happiness that they had before the tragic loss. So that's the thing about the hedonic treadmills. It works both ways. And that's we're so lucky we have that. We just need to know that it happens on the way up too. And so that's why it's so important to define success before you've walked 200 miles on the treadmill, so that you can actually look back and celebrate and feel proud of how far you came and where you are now.
I really think that's where minimalism comes into play here, because it's really difficult to let go of those things that we have called success. And so we're sitting there clinging to all of the things. It could be the literal things, the material possessions, the big house, the expensive car, the really nice clothes, the jewelry, the purse, the belt, the shoes. Nothing inherently wrong with those things. But if I'm steeped in all of these luxury goods, or now the new luxury good is just my follower count or my subscriber count, it's really hard to let those go. Why? Because we identify with them. This is who I am as a person. And if I let go of these, man, am I letting go of a piece of myself? Am I no longer me without 1 million followers, or 10,000 followers, or a $100,000 car? Am I not myself? But of course, the truth is, you are you if you let go of all of those things. And if you're steeped in all the luxury goods and miserable because you're clinging to success, is that success? I don't think so. To me, that's failure.
These things also become habits for us that we don't even, they're not even logical or choice-based things that we do. They're just things that we used to do. And so our brain has been remolded to just continue doing them. I mean, one example might be, apologies for using something you just did, but at the beginning of this podcast, you clapped. Now, I'm assuming that clap came from when you used to be recording for video and you needed to synchronize audio and video.
Sort of, yes.
Or is it for something else?
That was the original intent, but Peter asked us to keep doing it so he could sync stuff. Yes.
Okay, so then that's a terrible example. But
my bad.
The reason I bring it up is because
thanks a lot, Josh.
There are people who still like slate when they're filming video, for example, or they slate upside down. And the reason people used to slate upside down when they were filming video is because if you were looking through a roll of film, you need to know if it was the beginning of the film or the end of the film, and you could turn the film the other way around, and so you didn't know. And so that's why you used to tail slate upside down.
Oh, wow.
But in the day and age of like digital film, like you don't need to tail slate upside down anymore. And another one of my favorite stories is and I forgot where the story came from. It's such a great story, though, so I'm going to tell it anyway. But it's not mine; it's somebody else's. So trying to give the credit away here. But there was something like there was a woman. She was like cooking Christmas dinner every year. She would cut off the back of the ham, put the ham on the tray, bake the ham at 350, and she did this, for 20 years. And one year, her daughter asked her, "Hey, why do you cut off the back of the ham?" And she said, "Oh, it's the back of the ham, so you just have to like cut it off." And the daughter said, "But why? Why do you have to cut off the back of the ham?" And she's like, well, it's the back, and so you cut it off. And she said, no. What is the purpose of that? And she was like, I actually don't know. Let me call Grandma and ask Grandma. She said, "Grandma, why did you cut off the back of the ham?" And she said, "Oh, because my baking dish was only 12 inches and the ham wouldn't fit on the ham, so I cut off the back of the ham to fit the ham on the baking dish." Now, 20 years later, this person had an 18-inch baking dish and was still cutting off the back of the ham. We do that every day in our lives. We cut off the back of the ham. Every hour of every day. I know I do it too. None of us are immune. And you can be in the matrix and not even know why you're doing something anymore that used to provide utility to you and is no longer useful. To be able to pay attention to those things and see them when they happen is like if you can figure out how to do that, it's so helpful in your life.
We get so stuck in tradition that, it's always the way we've done it, becomes a useful shortcut. And quite honestly, it does make sense. Why do you drive on the right side of the road? That's all the way we've always done it. Yeah, but also it's so I don't hit someone head on in traffic, right? It is the tradition, and we could change that tradition, but it would require a shared acceptance. But for many things that we're doing it because that's the way it's always been done, or really that's the way that I have always done it, without ever stopping to question, why am I doing it this way? That's why I love this question of the week. If you could earn a living doing anything in the world, what would it be? Let us know in the Patreon community chat. We had one other person, Elizabeth. She said walking. If I wish I could make a living from walking.
Yes.
And you know what? I was like, I finally found one where you can't make a living from. And then I'm not kidding. I went to my local coffee shop. I live up in Ojai, and there's a little bulletin board there. And there's this therapist who does walking therapy. And right next to that, there was a sign for a dog walker. And then next to that, I'm not kidding you, there was someone who does walking meditations.
No way.
And so there are 3 different people in Ojai, a city with like 7,200 people. There are 3 people there who make a living from walking. Well, why? Because they questioned the assumptions. I can't make a living from walking. I just found 3 examples in my sleepy little community of people who are earning a living from walking. All right, Joe, we got a whole lot more to talk about. We're just getting started. A bouquet of callers coming up on the private podcast. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. Congratulations, TK. The season 1 finale of Thursday Conversations, we spell conversations with a K, was last Thursday on Patreon. So we did the 6-episode series. It's like a little mini solo podcast TK's been doing. It's like having a FaceTime call with some of the most interesting people that you've never met, but TK would like to introduce you to. People like his brother or former employees of The Minimalists, family members, famous people, celebrities. You can check out the first 6 episodes. That's season 1 over at patreon.com/theminimalist. Also coming soon on Patreon. I told you we're leaning in heavily to the creating for our core audience, our true fans over there on Patreon. We're doing minimalist meditations with Malabama, the most beautiful voice in the podcast sphere. She's going to be doing some monthly meditations for us to simplify, the clutter in your mind. Declutter your mind with Malabama. We also have this beautiful artistic video essay series. This is something I would have traditionally put out on social media, but because we're not on social media, it's like, how do we find a way to share this with people? Well, let's try it on Patreon. It's called Fragments. It's 6 video essays. Our talented filmmaker, Danny Unknown, he is creating all 6 of these, and I love the one. I just saw a first draft of TK. He's on the beach pushing a shopping cart, and that's all I can tell you about this. It is called The Shopping Cart, and it is a beautifully done video.
It's a documentary.
Wow.
All 6 episodes, you can find them coming soon at patreon.com/theminimalist. Jack, we got a lot more to talk about, but first, Malabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hello there, Joshua, TK, Ryan, and Mallory. My name is Chad, and I'm calling from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm a big fan of the podcast, Listen to It Weekly. One of the other things that I do is I read poetry on a weekly and a daily basis to ground me in my spiritual self. And one of the poems that I came across recently is from Mary Oliver that I thought I would just share for you as a listener tip. It is called Storage. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened, not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like the little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things. Burn them. Burn them. Make a beautiful fire. More room in your heart for love, for the trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly. Thanks, friends.
Chad, thank you so much for that poem. I read that. It's one of my favorite poems. I love Mary Oliver, and I read that one live in front of an audience at one of our Sunday symposiums here in Los Angeles. Malabama will put a link to that in the show notes as well if you want to compare, although I think you probably did a better job than me, Chad. Nice work. It's so good. Love that poem. For anyone else who has a listener tip or insight about this episode or any other episode, you can leave a comment on Patreon or YouTube, or better yet, send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com so we can feature your voice on the show. All right, that's the first 25 or 30% of episode 444. We'll see you on Patreon for the full Maximal Edition with Jack Conte, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Not just those questions, we have several simple living segments as well. We also have an outstanding home tour from one of our listeners this week on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. Big thanks to Jack Conte for joining us today. We'll put a link to his music and his YouTube channel in the show notes. That is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.